Welcome. The escalating confrontation between China and Taiwan in the Asia-Pacific region continues to be a major concern on the global agenda. China has conducted one of the largest military exercises in recent times, almost completely surrounding Taiwan with dozens of warships and fighter jets. The maneuvers, dubbed United Sword 2024A, were a response to the inauguration of Lai Ching-te as Taiwan's president. The very name of the exercise hints that this could be just the beginning of a string of threatening maneuvers this year, raising new concerns about a possible Chinese blockade of Taiwan's de facto sovereignty. Many analysts have argued in recent months that the greatest threat to Taiwan is not the possibility of a full-scale naval invasion, but rather gray zone tactics, coercive measures, or blockades that force Taiwan to capitulate to Chinese aggression. This view seems to be shared by Taiwanese officials as well. For example, Deputy Foreign Minister Roy Chung-lee said last year that China would rather impose an economic blockade on Taiwan than a direct military blockade. However, Taiwan still faces real threats from sea and air on top of economic restrictions. China has been increasingly focused in recent days on building up the capabilities of its Navy and Air Force to seize the island and take control of Taiwan. In the past 24 hours alone, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense has detected some 26 Chinese warplanes and 10 naval vessels in various areas around the country. 19 planes crossed the dividing line in the Taiwan Strait between the island and mainland China. Reaction followed immediately. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense condemned the Chinese exercise as immoral and provocative, saying Taipei had deployed naval, air, and land forces to defend sovereignty. China's latest actions seem to model a strategy of military invasion rather than economic blockade in the estimation of Taiwanese military experts. Another country, the Philippines, a close U.S. ally, has harshly criticized China's latest moves in the region. Speaking after the Shangri-La Security Dialogue in Singapore, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. warned China not to cross a red line in relations with its neighbors in the South China Sea. As tensions escalate, the likelihood of a Chinese attack on Taiwan is growing, but Beijing is also considering a non-military blockade of Taiwan. This move could be the beginning of a process by which China would attempt to absorb Taiwan. It is likely that Chinese authorities will resort to this tactic if they succeed in using gray zone warfare, coordinated propaganda, and a comprehensive re-education campaign to force Taiwan to capitulate. However, despite China's powerful influence operations in Taiwan, recruitment of agents, and current economic and military pressures, the vast majority of Taiwanese remain opposed to unification. Only 1.2% of Taiwan's population wants unification at the first opportunity, while another 7% are interested in principle. National pride, historical consciousness, and the desire for self-determination rose sharply on the island in the 1990s during the democratic transition. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun at last year's Shangri Dialogue lamented that separatists and outside forces supporting Taiwan's independence are undermining prospects for peaceful reunification. Chinese officials appear to recognize this reality. Alternatively, China may resort to an economic blockade in an attempt to strangle the Taiwanese economy from within. In this case, Beijing could avoid the expense, complexity, and risks of a full-scale battle. China's potential blockade of the island could take many forms. Beijing could declare restrictions on shipping in a certain maritime zone around Taiwan and warn that any vessel present there would be fired upon, or, similar to what Russia did in the Black Sea, China could avoid accusations of economic blockade by establishing a maritime quarantine, an inspection of all vessels entering or leaving Taiwan. Taipei is no doubt justifiably concerned that such action would have a disastrous impact on the island's economy and seriously threaten its de facto independence. However, the proposed economic blockade has a number of fundamental problems that could cause it to fail. First, it could seriously harm the Chinese economy itself, as China is heavily dependent on imports from Taiwan for critical technologies such as advanced semiconductors. China is still very far from being able to produce them on its own, especially after the US imposed new export restrictions last year. In 2022, Taiwan produced more than 60% of the world's semiconductors and 70% of advanced chips, key components for all modern electronics. Given the small size of these chips, most of them are transported from Taiwan by commercial flights rather than by sea. It is highly likely that Taiwan's first response to any attempt to quarantine or partially blockade the island would be to cut off shipments of such chips to China while maintaining shipments to the rest of the world. According to recent economic modeling in light of the semiconductor situation, China's GDP could fall 9% in the first year of the blockade. And if China imposes a full blockade, including the ability to shoot down civilian airplanes with semiconductors on board, triggering global condemnation similar to the Flight MH17 tragedy, global GDP could fall by 5%. And that doesn't take into account the possibility of a retaliatory counter-blockade by Taiwan. China's 5 busiest ports, Shanghai, Ningbo-Zhoushan, Shenzhen, Qingdao, and Guangzhou, are 1,000 miles from Taiwan and within range of Taiwan's newest supersonic cruise missile, the Qingshan. Even without direct U.S. military assistance, Taiwan would be able to significantly increase the threat to ships leaving Chinese ports, forcing international carriers and insurers to cease operations in the region. Thus, any attempt to blockade Taiwan could have serious economic consequences for China, and depending on the scale, for the world. There would be enormous pressure on the Chinese leadership to back down, and it would only increase with each day of supply chain disruption. Second, the economic blockade is likely to escalate into full-scale military intervention or even war because of the possibility of Taiwan retaliating against the blockade and the likelihood that the US and Japan will oppose it by imposing even greater costs. In this case, China may be forced into a costly naval and air battle, even if its primary objective is to seize the island. If China is not prepared for a full-scale invasion and the blockade serves only as a prelude to it, a humiliating and catastrophic defeat scenario is possible. Third, the blockade is fraught with serious geopolitical risks. At a minimum, it is likely to trigger a reassessment of the current international status quo regarding Taiwan's political status. Moreover, it could provoke Taiwan and its supporting forces to take more decisive action, up to and including an open declaration of independence. The US and its allies could respond by considering recognizing Taiwan's independence and threatening to abandon the long-standing One China policy if Beijing does not lift its blockade of the island. Over the past half-century, Washington's policy has consistently been committed to maintaining the status quo. That does not mean, however, that China can use force or pressure to unify and Taipei declare independence without facing US opposition. To prove that China's blockade of Taiwan has changed the status quo and will no longer force Washington to oppose the island's independence, the US would be wise to threaten Beijing in advance that any attempt to blockade or invade Taiwan would immediately result in the abandonment of the One China policy and the recognition of Taiwan. Many military experts believe such a move is appropriate to strengthen deterrence. Will Taiwan be able to overcome the blockade on its own? Undoubtedly, China's blockade will hit Taiwan's economy and people hard, but many underestimate the resources Taiwan has at its disposal to circumvent the blockade. The US imports more than $21 billion worth of food to Taiwan each year, mostly meat products. But Taiwan also has its own strong agricultural sector, producing huge amounts of rice, vegetables, and fruits. In addition, the local rivers and seas are rich in fish, so even in the case of China's illegal and immoral ban on food imports to the island, the Taiwanese will be able to feed themselves. Up to 98% of Taiwan's energy balance is made up of imported coal, oil, and land, so energy imports are critical to the economy. However, unlike Ukraine, Taiwan has a tropical, favorable climate, so that even in an energy shortage, people will not die of cold. In addition, the island has domestic sources of energy, hydroelectric power plants, offshore wind farms, and a rapidly developing solar energy industry. Taiwan also has 4 reactors that are currently being decommissioned but can be restarted in case of an emergency, plus 2 operating reactors that the ruling party wanted to abandon within a year. Undoubtedly, Taiwanese and their economy will have a tough time because of the limited power supply. But this will not become an existential threat, and some alternative, albeit imperfect, options will remain available to them. On the other hand, more than 60% of Taiwan's GDP is generated by exports. Blocking exports in whole or in part would deal a devastating blow to the Taiwanese economy, compounded by energy disruptions. However, there are no examples in recent history of countries or even cities giving up merely because of economic collapse. Neither Russia's systematic attempts to destroy Ukraine's economy during the invasion, nor U.S. sanctions against Iraq, Iran, and the DPRK have forced these countries to change policy or capitulate. A plan that includes only a blockade does not require aggressive action in the event that China mobilizes its occupation forces and then launches a blockade simultaneously with an ultimatum to Taiwan to surrender. China could credibly threaten a full-scale invasion if the blockade is rejected. This is because China has the capability to threaten a large-scale invasion. If mobilized, China could examine any public statements, plans, and deployments by these countries to make its own decisions. This would also give China the opportunity to determine whether the US, Japan, or other allies want to intervene in support of Taiwan. An economic blockade of Taiwan is a possible scenario. However, for such a blockade to make strategic sense, China would need to organize its military in preparation for a full-scale invasion, anticipating the need to escalate tensions. In either case, Taiwan would find itself in the situation described above. To better understand the PRC's military capabilities, this investigation is being conducted. If the Beijing administration truly believes that it will win without a fight, it is unclear why China has not yet launched a blockade. Perhaps China miscalculated and began the blockade without supporting the invasion threat. However, China's current actions indicate that such a breakthrough would almost certainly result in a loss of strategic advantage. While an economic blockade is possible, it is neither the most likely nor the worst outcome that Taiwan now faces. The most significant risk is military invasion. Taiwan still has a lot of work to do to prepare. If Taiwan continues to believe that a blockade is more likely than a military attack, or that a blockade will be the ultimate solution, it is making a potentially catastrophic error in judgment. Thanks for watching the video. Give it a like and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all the news. We wish you a good day.